Before we get started on this week's episode of Turning Back the Pages, I wanted to mention that the audio is a little off, and it's totally my fault. I was using a new computer to interview Caroline, and it was several minutes into our talk that I realized that while my computer was picking up audio, it was probably not going to be good audio. I so loved this conversation with Caroline, and with a little bit of podcast magic, I think it's still a fantastic listen, if you can just overlook that Caroline doesn't talk for the first several minutes. Enjoy the show. Welcome to Turning Back the Pages, the podcast where children's book authors discuss their favorite childhood books. I'm your host, Allie. Today, author Caroline Starr Rose is joining me to discuss her favorite childhood book, The Phantom Tollbooth. Caroline Starr Rose is a middle grade and picture book author whose books have been ALA, ALCS Notable, Junior Library Guild, ABA New Voices, Kids Indie Next, Amazon's Best Books of the Month for Kids, and Bank Street College of Education Best Book Selections. In addition, her books have been nominated for almost 24 state award lists. Caroline was named a Publishers Weekly Flying Start author for her debut novel, May Be. She spent her childhood in the deserts of Saudi Arabia and New Mexico and taught social studies and English in 4 different states. Caroline now lives with her family in New Mexico. So you chose The Phantom Tollbooth, which I thought I had read, but then when I started reading it last week, I was like, I don't know that I have read this, or if I have, it was a very long time ago. But I loved it. It was one that, from the first sentence, I was like, I'm going to like this book. I will do a short recap as well. Mine is, I wrote out the first line, and because I loved it so much. So here we go, 3, 2, 1. So this book is about a boy named Milo, and like I mentioned earlier, the first few lines of the book I think is a perfect opening. There was once a boy named Milo who didn't know what to do with himself, not just sometimes, but always. When he was in school, he wanted to be out. When he longed to be out. When he was out, he longed to be in. On the way, he thought about coming home, and coming home, he thought about going. Wherever he wished he were somewhere else, and when he got there, he wondered why he bothered. Nothing really interested him, least of all the things that should have. One day, Milo gets an unusual package, which turned out to be a toll booth. He drove through on his electric toy car. He's transported to the lands beyond. And then, like Caroline said, he goes on missions to places like Dictionopolis, the Island of Conclusions, the Valley of Sound, on a mission with Talk, a watchdog, and their guide, on a mission to save the princesses Rhyme and Reason, who are imprisoned. And after saving the princesses, Milo returned home to his bedroom. Only a few minutes had passed in his real life, but he found a note that said he had learned so much he should be able to find his way to all sorts of fantastic lands without the help of the toll booth. Well, I have a little bit of background information on the author. My library had this fantastic copy of an annotated version, and I loved it. I am going to keep it longer just so that I can read all the notes, because it got to the point that I just needed to finish the novel, but it was really fascinating. And one of the reasons that I started this podcast in the first place was because I always find it so fascinating, the authors' lives behind different stories. And his was for sure very interesting. So Norton Juster was born in June of 1929, just months before the Great Depression. He was born in Brooklyn, New York, to a Romanian-born Jewish father and a Polish Jewish mother. When he was a teenager, he had his sights set on a career in architecture, and he went looking for an apprenticeship. He was turned down, however, because he was told that in America, architecture was a gentleman's profession, which in his case meant that it was closed to Jews like himself. Juster refused to give up on his dreams and finally earned his license via a correspondence course. As a child, Juster struggled with math, and he figured out how to overcome the struggle with a super interesting strategy. Have you ever heard what his strategy was? So he had that phenomenon where he sees numbers as certain colors, and it felt right to associate each number from 0 to 9 with a different color, and he would write his math problems with colored pencils after that, and it helped. But through the struggle, he later said that he longed for the simple, carefree life of an adult. And from what I read, it sounded like he just really was not a big fan of school. He felt overwhelmed by a lot of the facts. He did enjoy reading, though. Can you think, remembering that he was born in 1929, can you guess some of his favorite childhood books? One of his favorite books was The Wizard of Oz, which seems so timely with Wicked having just come out. He loved L. Frank Baum's Oz books, and he also loved The Wing and the Willows by Kenneth Grahame, and then he also had a 20-volume encyclopedia set of the Book of Knowledge. When he was 31, Juster won a Ford Foundation grant to write a children's book about urban planning and design. The goal of the book was to inspire children growing up in suburban homes to consider the pleasure of living in cities, as well as to help children notice and appreciate the visual world around them. The grant gave him the ability to work only part-time, and he found time to mull over the ideas about urban design and human perception. He collected his research on note cards, but when he went to write, he said it felt like as if he was being buried alive under a mountain of facts, just like he was back in school. He took a short vacation, and while there, he began to write notes on what he thought might become a short story based on an interaction he had with a young boy in a restaurant. When he returned to Brooklyn from his vacation, he set aside his Ford Foundation fellowship for a time to write down his story, the first draft of The Phantom Tollbooth. At this point of his life, Juster and cartoonist Pfeiffer, along with a third friend, had pooled their resources and rented a duplex apartment on State Street. Juster did most of the cooking, and Return took most of the fourth floor to live in. Pfeiffer, who lived below Juster, would hear Juster pacing back and forth, back and forth. Finally, after nights of this, he went to check on Juster to see what he was doing. He knew about the Ford Foundation Fellowship and thought Juster was working on that project. Instead, though, he found Juster's secret Phantom Tollbooth project. Pfeiffer encouraged Juster's writing, and without prompting, he began to make sketches for the book, which I love. He just took it upon himself. He later said that if he knew he wanted Norton to keep on cooking for them, he'd have to illustrate the story himself. So the book was published in 1961. Critics compared it to works like The Wizard of Oz, which I thought was interesting, that one of his favorite books had such a strong influence. And one of the major themes of the book, learning the love of learning, seems to reflect Juster's own experience. It was also compared to things like Pilgrim's Progress, just a journey for the mind instead of a journey for the soul. The book did not do immediately well. Two of the book's major competitors were, can you guess two of the big competitors? It was James and the Giant Peach by Roald Dahl, and then The Bronze Bow. However, a raving review of it in the New Yorker a year later helped sales, and as of 2021, The Phantom Tollbooth has sold over 5 million copies. After publishing, Juster sent the book to the Ford Foundation, and they were thrilled with the turn of events. That's what I was nervous for him, because I was like, if he, like, would they be happy with this or not? But
I feel like it's got bits and pieces of that, like Jules Pfeiffer living nearby, but I didn't, and offering to illustrate. But that's really fun.
Yeah, I know.
And I love, yes, the comparison to The Wizard of Oz, because it is a story grounded in reality, where a character then goes to a fantasy land and then returns home. So how satisfying to have his favorite story.
I know.
His work compared to that book that he loves so much.
Yes. If that story was entertaining to you, I found it very entertaining. You'll really enjoy the annotated version of this.
I need to check it out. More than once I've almost bought it, and I thought, well, I've got my own beloved copy, this paperback that is falling apart. It's filthy from my teacher fingers reading it over the years, but it's and this actually is really fun. I have Jules Pfeiffer and Norton Juster.
Oh,
so
how fun.
Really fun.
That is fantastic. That's super cool. The last bit of history, and then we'll get to talking about it. Juster in 2011 said he believed the book was just as relevant today as when he wrote it. He said, "When I grew up, I felt like that puzzled kid, disconnected, disinterested, and confused. There was no rhyme or reason in his life. My thoughts focused on him, and I began writing about his childhood, which was really mine. Today's world of texting and tweeting is quite a different place, but children are still the same as they've always been. They still get bored and confused and still struggle to figure out the important questions of life. Well, one thing has changed. As many states eliminate tolls on the highways, some children may never encounter a real toll booth. Luckily, there are other routes to the lands beyond, and it's possible to seek them and fun to try.
Oh, I love that. Whimsical and wonderful.
Mm-hmm. So tell me why you chose the Phantom Tollbooth and memories about your first time reading it.
Yeah, my sixth grade language arts and social, no, not language arts and social studies, just language arts teacher assigned this to my class. And I don't remember if we read it. I feel like we must have read parts of it aloud and then parts to ourselves, because I do remember discussions we had about various characters and things. But I just thought it was so fun. It was so creative. It was so entertaining. It was just this whole world where I could understand these clever puns and wacky characters. And, they were talk about idioms and just, the sorts of things that you're learning in English class. And I just thought it was delightful. And I ended up being a middle school teacher. And so during my student teaching, I got to student teach in a sixth grade classroom. And I asked my mentor teacher if I could read this book with our students. And again, it was fabulous. And so that went on. I continued to read this over the years with various classes in various places, and then eventually to my own children. So I've probably read this book 30 times or so. I'm not exaggerating. I think it is so clever. The plotting is clever. The writing is clever. The word choice, the words are pleasant to say. I mean, it's just, everything about it is really just finely done.
Yes, I really agree. It's like I've read the first lines. You just know exactly who Milo is.
Exactly. We can relate, or we know somebody just like him, or, there are plenty of times we've all felt like, I don't want to be here, but then when I'm in this other situation, oh, that's not satisfying either. I think he's kind of every kid.
I 100% agree. I thought it was such an interesting story, so well told. The places are fun and different. I mean, I laughed out loud I loved talk a whole lot, and I loved, I wrote it down. When they were in Dictionopolis, Milo says, "I never knew words can be so confusing," Milo said to Talk as he bent down to scratch the dog's ears. "Only when you use a lot to say a little," answered Talk. And just things like that, which just have so much truth and wisdom, and authors for forever have talked about how clarity is important. And, I'm sorry I didn't have lots of time to write, or lots of time to sit down and write. So I rambled instead of being concise. I've heard that quote from, I can't remember who said it, but, things like that is some truths like that were just tucked into this book in such delightful ways.
Oh, there are like dozens of little nuggets like that you can hold on to from this story.
Yes. And I had to stop writing them so that I could actually get through reading the book. There were so many. How has reading this book changed through the years?
I think, at first as a child, I think I was just delighted with the storyline and the fact that I could see some of the things we had talked about in class actually presented in the book. Little funny witticisms like when they're in Dictionopolis and at King Azaz's banquet, everybody is supposed to announce their meal, and the meal appears. And somebody talks about wanting a synonym bun instead of a cinnamon bun. And just funny things where I felt like I was mature enough and witty enough to be in on the joke. I thought that was so fun as a kid. I think, as I've grown, I've been able to see those things were certainly fun to bring into my classroom as well. But I think as an adult, it's been really interesting to see just how timely this book continues to be, like Norton Juster said in 2011. And I'm thinking specifically about the section where they're the two, they're driving through the lands beyond, looking, trying to find Ryan and Reason. And they come to two towns, and one is called Reality and one is called Illusions. Mm-hmm. And I think, how does it work? Illusions is the one that exists, and reality no longer exists.
Yes.
I think that's how it works. And what happens is the people are walking around not paying attention to what's around them. I mean, it gave me chills. The most recently I read this, I think 2 years ago with my book club. And it was prescient. It felt like, my gosh, this guy is looking ahead to where we are, yes, absorbed in our minds, absorbed on our phones, walking around, not taking in the world around us. And so the world around them faded away and no longer existed.
Yes.
And that's just profound. I mean, it really is powerful.
Yes. I know. It's so interesting how someone can write from that long ago, and it just seems more and more relevant today. Yes. A true classic. In timeless insights. What is your favorite part of the book?
I don't know. One thing I think is really fun. Milo goes to the Valley of Sound, mm-hmm, and there's so many clever things. I think the Valley of Sound, and then later when he goes to, I'll talk about that in a second. But the idea of this Valley of Sound is now silent, because with Rhyme and Reason gone from the kingdom, everything has been thrown out of whack. So the Valley of Sound is silent, and Milo is charged with bringing sound back into the valley if possible. So he's been asked to go into the Sound Keeper's, what does she have, a castle? I don't remember, mm-hmm, what, mm-hmm, fortress, something like that. And just this idea, just the creativity behind this really, I can still picture this as I did as an 11-year-old. He goes into this fortress, and this sound keeper, this woman, has file cabinet after file cabinet after file cabinet of sounds. Mm-hmm. Now, it's the 60s, so kids nowadays might not really know what file cabinets are. Maybe just computer files. But to think that she could open a file and say, this is what you said to your mother 3 years ago on a Tuesday afternoon, and pull out the sound. Or she could, show you what the sound of drum beats sounds like big cotton balls filling the air. I think that was just so clever to think, mm-hmm, of the senses blending together. Mm-hmm. And right after this, Milo then hears, he sees, but he primarily hears the sunset. And there is a maestro, a conductor named Chroma the Great, who plays the sunrise and the, mm-hmm, sunset with a huge orchestra every morning, noon and night, to keep the sun in the sky. And these ideas of blending senses, of just experiencing the world in an entirely new way, was just so intriguing to me. And it really just speaks to the joy of children's literature and the sort of gift I want to give children, mm-hmm, in what I do. I mean, I don't write as Juster did, but just that awe and that just seeing familiar things in a new way, mm-hmm, that just delighted me and continues to delight me. And it's something that I hope I can also offer children.
Yeah. Sunrise and sunset being set to an orchestra. That also makes sense to me, because I have always associated sunrise with an orchestra. There's a song that came out in probably 2010, 2011. And I've always said, if the sunrise had a song, this would be it. And it's this just slowly builds and builds and builds until, I imagine, the sun just popping out.
Well, I'm just finally putting two and two together with you saying that Juster had how do you say that?
Mm-hmm, something like that.
That makes perfect sense.
It does.
The blending of the senses and how he experienced the world, and then how he could bring that into this fantasy world. Oh my gosh, that's really amazing.
I know. And that's why I loved reading about the background of authors, because It's like, this is a great book by itself, but then when you look at all the different things that went into writing this book, it's just so fascinating. Who is your favorite character?
I don't know if I could pick one. I would say I think what I love, well, of course I love Milo because he's really the stand-in for all of us. He's this everyday kid in this entirely new world, and so he's our guide in that he's experiencing all this new and strange stuff along with us. So he can kind of be the one who's our eyes and our ears. So I really love Milo. But I love all these tertiary characters that just have a few pages devoted to them because they're so different. They're so interesting. I mentioned the sound keeper, who really is sad that she has removed the sound from the Valley of Sound and is lonely. And you know, she's suffering the consequences of rhyme and reason being banished from the kingdom. And Chroma the Great, with his flourish to conduct the sunrise and the sunset. There's a funny character, Faintly Macabre, the not-so-wicked witch, who's been banished, or she's been put in prison for, I think, like 1,000 years or something like that in Dictionopolis. There's the dodecahedron in Digitopolis, that is a 12-based creature, and so I've always remembered dodeca must be 12-sided. You know, these things come from. There's Alec Bings, a boy who grows down instead of growing up. And so they're just these characters that they encounter along the way. Oh, the Terrible Trivium. Do you remember the Terrible Trivium?
I think I was having to speed read through that one, so I don't remember that.
So I'll tell you, at the very end, to get to the castle in the air, the Milo Talk and the Humbug, the Milo Talk and are the sidekicks that are traveling through the lands beyond with Milo, and they have to go through the what's the mountain called? The mountain. There are demons all over this mountain that they must pass through, and they have to climb this mountain to reach the
Mountains of Ignorance.
Mountains of Ignorance. Isn't that perfect?
Yes.
Mountains of Ignorance. They must climb through the Mountains of Ignorance to rescue Rhyme and Reason, and there are all these demons that they encounter in the mountains that are trying to thwart their quest. And one is named the Terrible Trivium. And he convinces, and this also felt very relevant today, he convinces Milo Talk and the Humbug, he gives them these tasks that seem terribly important, like you must use an eyedropper to move one drop of water from a bucket, or from a well, from here over to there. And just ridiculously stupid things. And they get so involved in this, they don't realize that if they were to complete these tasks, it would take dozens or thousands or however many years. And it's only when the spell is broken by somebody else that they're able to realize, what was I thinking? What was I doing? Why was I so involved in this thing that was meaningless? And that feels really relevant today because I feel like we can get so involved in things that when you step back, give yourself some distance, or even give yourself, think 5 years from now, will I really care about X, Y, and Z? Or why did I devote so much time to that? So that is interesting too. There are just so many interesting characters that have just a small bit of time in the story, but really make a lasting impact as far as thoughts go.
Right. I love that. Tell me about what you're working on and what you have written.
Yeah, I would love to tell you about my most recent, the one that's coming out in May, if I can. Because I saw it for the last time, fingers crossed today. I think today was the last time I turned it back in. But it is a verse novel. I haven't published a verse novel for 10 years. When this comes out in May 2025, it will be 10 years. And I'm assuming your audience is familiar with verse novels.
Yes.
But just in case, just in case I can explain what that is. But I published 2 verse novels previously, Maybe, which you've read, and Bluebirds, which both are historical fiction. This is my first time stepping out into contemporary fiction, and that's kind of wild and thrilling and exciting. And it's called The Burning Season, and it's I mean, every book you write is very special, and I think the one that you're working on presently is the one that you love the most, which is as it should be, because otherwise, how could you sustain your interest for so many years?
Right.
But The Burning Season is especially relevant for me because it's the first book I've ever written in my home state of New Mexico. And it's about wildfire, which we know well here in the desert Southwest. And it's about a girl named Opal who's been raised in a fire tower. I don't know, are you familiar with what a fire tower is?
I am not.
Hi, well, good. I can tell you about it. So fire towers, there were once thousands of these all over the country, and there are only a few hundred still standing today, and just a couple hundred of those still standing are still in operation. So fire towers were set up after a huge fire burned in 1910. It consumed 3 million acres, it was the worst fire in American history, and is still to this day the worst fire in American history. And so once this happened, the country decided we have got to have a better way to be prepared for wildfire. So these towers went up all over the country. The ones that are still in operation are primarily in the Rocky Mountain areas. The rest of the country doesn't suffer from wildfire as much as the Southwest and the Northwest does. And people live in these towers for 6 months of the year, typically April through August. And it is very rudimentary. They use a tool called the Osborne Firefinder that was invented in 1912. It's only gone through a few changes since then. It is still very basic. And using telephone or radios, they call in every day to a dispatch center saying if they can see fire. And so their job every 15 minutes is to scan the horizon. And if they see any slight change, to see if it might be smoke, to watch that, to report that, to write it down. It's a job that a lot of people don't know exists. It's a job that's very remote and takes a lot of, you have to be willing to make friends with solitude, I think is one of the lines in my book. So Opal in my story has grown up in this environment. Now, nobody lives in a tower full time, but in my book she does, because I can do whatever I want. And she's just about to turn 12. She actually, the book starts on her 12th birthday, and she will be someday the 4th generation female lookout. That's what they're called, people who look for the fires in the towers, in her family. She's really proud of this heritage. She thinks she wants to do this work, but she's holding a secret, and her secret is she's deathly afraid of fire. So it's kind of the unfolding of how Opal is going to do this training, how she's going to face her fears, and then it comes to a point. Well, I'll just tell you this. This book is, I have thought of this book as maybe 2.0.
Okay.
So I wrote this book realizing I still have more I want to say about solitude, nature, and survival, which are the themes, largely the main themes of Maybe. And so Opal will spend half of this book by herself, confronting her fears in nature and needing to survive. I also, if people have read Maybe, there are a few Easter eggs in here. You might realize that Opal, at least in my mind, is the great granddaughter of Maybe.
Oh, I love that.
There's some fun little things that some readers might be able to see, and if they don't, this book certainly stands alone. Maybe is never mentioned, but there are connections in the story. So.
Oh, that's so fun. Well, who do you hope reads this book?
My gosh.
And is that the poster of it behind you?
Yes, it is. Yes, right over my shoulder.
I noticed that was a very cool. And then when you were describing it, I was like, oh, I think that's it right there.
Yeah, it's a fabulous cover. I'm pleased. You hope everybody reads your book, but also the truth is not every book is for every reader. But I hope kids who are curious, kids who love poetry, kids who don't love poetry. I think verse novels really make poetry accessible.
Yes.
Sometimes people will say, I can't stand poetry. And then after a few pages, I just kind of forgot the style in which I was reading, and I got involved in the story, which is high praise if somebody is not interested in poetry for them to feel that way. But I think kids who like adventure stories, Maybe was inspired by Hatchet and by Little House on the Prairie. So The Burning Season was inspired by Maybe, but also another Hatchet book, Brian's Winter, was inspired, and that book makes an appearance in Opal's story. So kids who like adventure stories, who like survival stories, who like, I'm trying to think of recent books. Alone has been a big hit. It's another verse novel that's a survival story that interests readers. Yeah, any sort of adventure or survival story, or stories where kids feel like they're not enough, because that's I think that's a theme all of us experience at some point. I'm not good enough at A, B, or C, or I'm not cool enough, or I'm not fill in the blank enough. That's a theme I deal with a lot in the books that I write, because I think that's something we all relate to, which Milo, he felt he wasn't smart enough. He wasn't good enough in school. And that really did affect how he experienced the world.
For sure. Do you want to share where people can follow you? Any newsletters or website or anything like that?
Yeah, I am no longer on social media. I like to say I have blissfully left that behind. But I've run a blog / hybrid newsletter since 2009 that people can find at my website, CarolineStarRose.com, and Star has 2 R's. So that's like 3 R's in a row there, Star Rose, where you can read that, you can sign up for that. I like to talk about what I'm reading. I like to introduce new books to my readers, who are primarily parents, teachers, librarians. I like to share quotes about reading and writing, and then I share about my writing process too. So it's just been something I've really enjoyed, and I can't imagine stopping it anytime soon. And come along and read with me.
Well, fantastic. Thank you so much for being here. I really enjoyed talking with you about the Phantom Tollbooth, and I hope that everyone that is listening goes out and rents it from your library or buys it from your independent bookstore and enjoys it, because it's definitely a fun one. Also, The Burning Season is out in May 2025. Until then, you can read Maybe and all the other ones. Thank you so much. It was great talking to you.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Turning Back the Pages. If you have any author suggestions, you can follow me on Instagram at WhatAllieWrites or email me at whatallywrites@gmail.com. Allie is ALLY. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen.